Hi, my name is Keval Harie and I'm the Executive Director of the GALA Queer Archive based in Johannesburg. GALA was started as a counter to the narrative of homosexuality being un-African, which is a trope that we hear all across this continent. And the way in which we do that is by uncovering the lived experiences and the histories of queer life on the continent. Our project is intrinsically one of human rights, offering human rights to the LGBTQIA+ community by ensuring that we uncover our own history, which has systematically been erased, and by also providing a visibility as a form of affirmation for those who are queer and African and proud to be so. The benefits and importance of a queer archive cannot be understated. Historically, queer lives, queer voices have been erased from the archive. The queer archive turns the actual idea of an archive on its head because it reinserts and reimagines what our history would be like. Now, why is it important from a human rights perspective? Because if we can't see ourselves in our own history, in our community's history, then we can't affirm our existence. So as part of fighting for our rights, for equality, for justice against discrimination, for justice against violence, we have to proudly say we are here, we have always been here, our ancestors are behind us, and our project of affirmation is critical to ensuring a community that is safe, that is kind, that is protective of all that live in it. And so the archive really allows us to do that for ourselves. We often say that there are activists and organizations, queer organizations in South Africa that stand on the front lines, that change policy, that picket. And GALA considers itself to be a soft activist. We're a gentle activist. We have to appeal to communities by sharing each other's stories in a way that allows people who are perhaps fearful, who perhaps don't understand, and engaging with them by giving them a sense of our own existence and experience and struggles in order to gain empathy. And that's the role of an archive. The kinds of materials that GALA considers are important to be archived is, let me say, everything. Because the queer archive is also something deeply personal. We're trying to preserve people's lives and their stories. And anything can be a part of your story. Even if we think about our own families and what reminds us of certain people within our families, particularly those who we're fond of. It's little memories here and there. It's things that affect or tap into our sixth senses. So personally for me, a very important part of my upbringing is remembering my grandmother's baking, which I know for a lot of queer kids is such an important memory. And so when we think about the archive, particularly a community archive, for us it's important to say, what would you like to preserve? What would you like to share? And that can be a whole range of things. It can be letters, it can be photographs, it can be films. It can also be physical objects which to us remind us of our existence. Social media platforms and the digital platforms allow younger people to archive their lives by showing their existence, whether it's engaging with friends, whether it's being at pride marches, whether it's being at protests, or whether it's just living every day. And that visibility is important because remember, what we're fighting against is people saying to us, who you are is un-African. And we're saying, no, we're not. Because here we are, we're on every social media platform, we're engaging with our communities and sharing that as a way of creating a visibility. So I think the digital platform has really allowed us with a far greater platform and visibility. Having said that, I think it's also important to appreciate that for a lot of people, digital access is still a huge thing, and so we also have to think about the social inequalities that exist within the digital platform, which is also why GALA has to provide opportunities and spaces where people who don't necessarily have that access can also feel a part of this digital community. So I think the way in which we can protect our archives, and protection is a really good word, and I'll give you the examples of the GALS collection which resides at GALA. So GALS is the Gays and Lesbians of Zimbabwe, which is an organization based in Zimbabwe, and that collection came to GALA primarily as a reason of threat. That organization was facing a huge threat of being shut down and their offices being ransacked by security services in Zimbabwe. And as a form of safekeeping, it was sent to us, and we continue to hold that archive on behalf of them as a matter of safekeeping. And so we always have to think about how it is that we safekeep our historical archives as a way of protecting it for generations to come. And the same exists if we think about, South Africa's brutal history of apartheid and why the District 6 Museum is so important, because it is a center of memory. And so when we think about that protection, we need to realize that one, it's not only the physical protection of what happens to photographs if they aren't properly, kept in a space that is, carbon dioxide safe and all of the things that usually come with an archive and protecting historical documents. For us, it's a measure of ensuring that we are never once again erased from history. And so that protection means that spaces like GALA offering platforms to various communities, various organizations. Last year we did a project in Mozambique around an oral history project, and that was an engagement which we felt was important in order to support the archiving practices that are happening all across the continent. And so, one, it's about sharing ideas, it's about sharing techniques for archiving, and then I think very importantly the digital platforms that allow and make it a lot more possible for us to safeguard the collections in ways that weren't previously available. So the way in which GALA considers effectively showcasing items, and I think this goes back to my point of GALA turns the traditional notion of an archive on its head. We're not just this historical repository of dusty materials. Our project is far more active in that we have to remind people of this history. And so we do that by saying we must have, we do exhibitions on the archival collections. We publish books around it. We have various conversations. We make sure that the archive is accessible to anyone in the community who wants to access it. So that means researchers, scholars, writers, artists, journalists, and even activists, even members who just want to walk in and say, hey, I want to look at a specific collection. And that's important because it means that the archive isn't something that belongs to anyone or is not exclusive. It means that anyone who really wants to ask questions is able to access it, and that's why our library space is also quite important when we consider community spaces or spaces of affirmation or safe spaces as it's referred to. And I think why that's also important is that the more people access the archive, the more conversations we have about it. And so the more the intentional project of visibility becomes realized. We should never underestimate the threats and violence that our community faces. And for us, we always have to bring it back to the community that we represent and serve. And historically, archives, particularly as colonial projects, have been used as ways of really violating human beings, particularly people of color. It's how the colonial empires kept records of individuals and slaves and indentured laborers. And in the context of South Africa, that is very clear. And so for us, it's a reminder of being able to use the archive to serve the community. That means we can never be extractive about the work that we do. So for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, GALA as an archive for the first time engaged in relief work, which is not the traditional role of an archive, but it was important to us because we can't turn our backs on our community during times of hardship. And I think, so the ways in which various organizations and queer organizations understand solidarity and what that means, particularly as we continue to face violence, is important, and it means that no matter what kind of work you do within the sector, whether it's through healthcare, whether it's media and ensuring that cases of hate crimes are being reported, whether it's the work of an archive in ensuring that activists, writers, scholars have access to historical material for the production of knowledge, it means that our goal is all the same. It's to ensure that our community is safe, that our community has a voice, and that we're not going anywhere. And so I think from that perspective, the work of GALA is so important, particularly when we think of the fact that, last year in South Africa alone, there were 26 hate crimes all across the country. People that were killed as a result of hatred, of bigotry, and of fear. And we have to be able to counter those, and that has to guide our daily practice within the archive. So now that you know about the House of GALA, you are always welcome, fam.